Red and blue sirens piercing the darkness usually mean a simple speeding citation. Yet, when a bitterly prejudiced local cop profiled a silent, unassuming black man on an isolated county road, he thought he had snagged an easy mark. He never suspected he was actually handcuffing a senior FBI agent. Special Agent Darius Langford of the Federal Bureau of Investigation adjusted his grip on the leather steering wheel of his unmarked Chevy Malibu. I was exhausted. It had been a grueling stretch coordinating a multi-agency sting operation 2 counties over, and all he wanted was the quiet comfort of his own bed. I was driving through Oak Haven, a notoriously insulated mid-sized jurisdiction bordering the interstate. Darius had his cruise control set exactly to the speed limit. He wasn't in a rush. After years in federal law enforcement, he knew the value of flying under the radar, especially in towns where the local law operated like lords of their own private fiefdoms. Behind him, the dense tree line of Highway 9 obscured the moonlight, leaving the road enveloped in total darkness, save for the sweep of his headlights. Then the darkness was violently shattered by a strobe of red and blue. Darius glanced in his rearview mirror. A patrol cruiser had aggressively swung out from a concealed turnabout, its siren giving a short, sharp wail. Darius sighed, tapped his brakes, and smoothly pulled his Malibu onto the gravel shoulder. He placed the car in park, turned off the engine, and rolled down all 4 windows, a standard safety protocol. He turned on the interior dome light and placed both his hands at the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel. He knew the drill better than the men who were about to approach his car. In the cruiser behind him, Officer Blake Hensley unbuckled his seatbelt with a heavy, deliberate snap. Hensley was a veteran of the Oak Haven Police Department, a man whose personnel file was thick with use-of-force complaints and racial profiling accusations that had miraculously disappeared into the bureaucratic ether. Hensley liked the night shift. He liked the autonomy. Most of all, he liked the power. "What do we got, Blake?" asked his partner, Nate Soren. Soren was a young rookie who still believed in the badge, but was rapidly learning that his training officer operated by a completely different rulebook. "Just a hunch, rookie," Hensley sneered, his eyes locked on the silhouette of the black man in the driver's seat of the Chevy. Out-of-state plates, dark tint, driving a little too careful. "Let's see what this guy's moving." "I was doing exactly the speed limit," Soren noted, his voice hesitant. "Exactly," Hensley said, grabbing his heavy maglite. "Only criminals drive the exact speed limit when there's no traffic. Watch and learn." Hensley approached the driver's side of the Malibu, his boots crunching loudly on the gravel. He intentionally kept his hand resting on the butt of his holstered sidearm, an intimidation tactic designed to set the tone immediately. Soren flanked the passenger side, standing slightly back, shining his flashlight into the rear seats. Without a word of greeting, Hensley thrust his high-beam maglite directly into Darius's eyes, blinding him. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now!" Hensley barked, his tone dripping with unearned authority and barely concealed contempt. Darius didn't flinch. He squinted slightly against the harsh glare, but kept his voice completely level. "Good evening, officer. They are in my wallet, which is in my right back pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now. Is that all right with you?" Hensley scoffed, clearly irritated by the driver's calm, articulate demeanor. He was used to panic. He thrived on fear. The lack of it offended him. "Cut the polite act, boy. Just hand over the papers. No sudden movements." The use of the word boy hung in the cold night air. Soren, standing on the passenger side, winced visibly. Darius's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, the only physical betrayal of his rising anger. In his breast pocket rested his solid gold FBI badge and federal credentials. He could end this right now. He could flash his ID, pull rank, and have this small-town bully stuttering apologies. But a sudden, profound realization stopped him. Oak Haven had been on the Bureau's radar. Civil rights groups had filed numerous lawsuits against this exact precinct for systematic profiling, illegal searches, and harassment. The Department of Justice was secretly building a preliminary file. Darius realized he had just been handed a golden opportunity. He wasn't going to show his badge. He was going to let Officer Hensley dig his own grave, shovel by arrogant shovel. "Reaching for my wallet now," Darius said calmly. He retrieved his civilian driver's license, which listed his real name and a P.O. box in Washington, D.C., but completely omitted his federal employment. He then leaned over slowly and pulled the rental registration from the glove box. He handed the documents through the window. Hensley snatched them away. He shone his light on the ID, his lip curling into a sneer. "Darius Langford, D.C. address. Long way from home, Darius. What exactly brings you to my town at this hour in a car that ain't yours?" "I'm passing through on my way home from work," Darius replied smoothly. "The vehicle is a fleet rental provided by my employer." "Work?" Hensley let out a dry, mocking laugh. "What kind of work requires you to drive through Oak Haven at this hour? You don't look like a corporate executive to me. Whose car is this really?" As the registration states, it's a corporate fleet vehicle. I am authorized to drive it. Hensley leaned in closer, his face inches from the window, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and chewing tobacco. I think you're lying. I think you're moving something from the city. In fact, I smell marijuana coming from this vehicle. It was the oldest, dirtiest trick in the corrupt cop playbook. The undeniable, unprovable smell of contraband, instantly manufacturing probable cause. There is no marijuana in this vehicle, officer, Darius said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a sudden heavy weight of authority that took Hensley by surprise. I do not smoke, and I do not consent to a search of this vehicle. Hensley's eyes went wide with fury. How dare this man tell him what he could and couldn't do? Step out of the car, Hensley ordered, stepping back and unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. Now. Soren stepped forward on the passenger side, his voice trembling slightly. Blake, wait. The guy checked out on the radio. No warrants. Shut up, Soren. I said step out of the car, Hensley roared, his hand now resting firmly on his weapon. Darius remained seated for one more second. He took a slow, deep breath, committing fully to the course of action he had chosen. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled his seatbelt, pulled the keys from the ignition, and stepped out of the vehicle. He stood at his full height, towering over the stocky, red-faced local officer. Turn around, hands on the roof, Hensley commanded. Darius complied. Hensley grabbed Darius's arms with excessive force, kicking his legs apart roughly and patting him down with a heavy, invasive hand. He found nothing but Darius's cell phone and a few receipts. Watch him, Soren, Hensley barked. He then leaned into the Malibu and began to tear it apart. He ripped the center console open, tossing papers onto the passenger seat. He pulled the floor mats out and threw them onto the wet gravel. He was manic, desperate to find anything to justify his initial prejudice. He found nothing in the cabin. Furious, Hensley marched to the trunk. Pop it, he demanded. I have already stated I do not consent to a search, Darius said calmly, his hand still resting on the roof of the car. Any evidence you claim to find will be inadmissible as this is an illegal search. I told you I have probable cause. The smell, Hensley spat, snatching the keys from the roof of the car where Darius had placed them. He jammed the key into the trunk lock and threw it open. Inside the trunk, there was nothing but a spare tire, a jumper cable kit, and a heavy reinforced Pelican case secured with 2 steel combination padlocks. Hensley's eyes lit up. He grinned, looking back at Darius like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Well, 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 what do we have here? A locked box, the perfect place to hide weight. What's in the box, Darius? For the first time, a faint, dangerous smile played on Darius's lips. That case contains classified, sensitive materials belonging to the United States government. It is federal property. I strongly advise you not to attempt to open it or confiscate it. Hensley let out a loud barking laugh that echoed through the empty woods. United States government? What? You're a secret agent now? A spy? Give me a break. Open the box. I will not. Then I'm taking it, Hensley said, lifting the heavy case out of the trunk and dropping it onto the gravel. And I'm taking you, Darius Langford. You are under arrest. Soren, looking increasingly panicked, stepped toward his partner. Blake, stop. Arrest for what? We don't have anything on him. He hasn't broken any laws. Resisting an officer, suspicion of drug trafficking, hindering an investigation. Hensley fired off the charges like he was reading from a menu. He grabbed his handcuffs, spun Darius around, and slammed his wrists together behind his back. The metal bit sharply into Darius's skin as Hensley ratcheted the cuffs down as tight as they would go. A vindictive, painful punishment for Darius's defiance. Darius didn't struggle. He allowed himself to be manhandled toward the back of the Oak Haven police cruiser. Before Hensley pushed his head down into the back seat, Darius locked eyes with the enraged officer. Officer Hensley, Darius said, his voice entirely devoid of fear, vibrating with a cold, terrifying certainty. You have just made the biggest mistake of your professional life, and the consequences are going to arrive much faster than you think. Get in the car, Hensley sneered, shoving Darius into the hard plastic seat and slamming the door shut. Hensley walked back to the Malibu, grabbed the locked Pelican case, and tossed it into the trunk of his cruiser. He turned to a pale, sweating Soren. See, rookie, you got to trust your gut. Guy's got a locked box he won't open. Claims he works for the government. That's a mule. We just pulled a major drug runner off the streets. The captain is going to pin a medal on my chest. Blake, I don't feel good about this. The guy wasn't scared. People with drugs are scared. He looked at you like you were a bug on a windshield. He's putting on a show, Hensley dismissed, climbing into the driver's seat. Call for a tow truck to impound the Chevy. We're taking Mr. Langford down to the station. Once I get the bolt cutters on that box, we'll see who's a bug. As the cruiser pulled away, gravel spitting from its tires, Darius sat quietly in the dark back seat. His wrist ached from the overly tight cuffs, but his mind was sharp and calculating. Inside his suit jacket, hidden in a concealed inner pocket that Hensley's sloppy pat-down had completely missed, was his federally encrypted satellite phone. Furthermore, the Pelican case Hensley had just stolen didn't contain drugs. It contained Level 4 classified case files pertaining to a federal corruption sting, along with highly sensitive tracking equipment that was currently broadcasting its exact location directly to the FBI field office in Washington. Assistant Director Quinn Ashford was expecting Darius to check in. Ashford was not a patient man, and when the FBI's regional command center realized that a senior agent had gone completely off the grid and that a heavily guarded federal lockbox was suddenly moving toward a corrupt county jail, hell was going to rain down on Oak Haven. Darius leaned his head back against the plexiglass divider, a grim satisfaction settling over him. Officer Blake Hensley wanted a drug bust to inflate his ego. Instead, he had just kidnapped a federal agent and committed grand larceny of classified government property. The trap was closed. Now it was time to let the predator realize he was actually in a cage. The drive to the Oak Haven Police Department was agonizingly slow, a deliberate psychological tactic employed by Officer Blake Hensley to assert total dominance. He took every pothole on purpose, causing Darius Langford to jolt painfully against the unforgiving plastic of the cruiser's back seat. The heavy metal handcuffs were cutting off the circulation to Darius's hands, sending a cold, stinging numbness creeping up his forearms. He remained entirely silent, his steady gaze fixed on the wire mesh separating him from the two officers. Nate Soren sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead into the darkness, his knuckles white as he gripped the door handle. The young rookie's conscience was screaming at him, but the deeply ingrained toxic thin blue line culture paralyzed his vocal cords. They arrived at the precinct, a squat, brutalist concrete structure that looked more like a forgotten Cold War bunker than a pillar of community justice. The neon sign out front flickered with a dying buzz, casting a jaundiced yellow light across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Hensley yanked the cruiser's rear door open and hauled Darius out by the collar of his tailored suit jacket. "Move it, drug kingpin!" Hensley sneered, shoving Darius roughly toward the heavy glass double doors. Soren followed quietly, carrying the heavy locked Pelican case he had retrieved from the cruiser's trunk. The reinforced case felt strangely warm in Soren's hands, humming with an almost imperceptible electronic vibration. He didn't know it, but he was holding a military-grade GPS transponder that was currently screaming its exact coordinates to a highly secure server in Washington, D.C. Inside, the station smelled of stale sweat, cheap floor bleach, and burnt coffee. The night shift desk sergeant, a balding, apathetic man named Elias Crow, barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as Hensley dragged his prisoner into the booking area. "What do we have tonight, Blake?" Crow grunted, clicking his pen lazily. "Another out-of-towner lost on the highway?" "Got a live one, Sarge," Hensley boasted loudly, puffing out his chest and making sure the few other officers lingering in the bullpen heard him. "Refused a lawful search, driving a corporate rental, lying about his employment, and carrying a locked steel case in the trunk. I smell a major trafficking operation moving through our jurisdiction. Book him for resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, and suspicion of narcotics distribution. I'm going to go crack that box open and get us our felony charges." Darius was aggressively shoved into a sterile, windowless holding room. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind him, the deadbolt clicking with a final echoing thud. He stood in the center of the cramped, freezing room, slowly rolling his broad shoulders to alleviate the agonizing strain on his pinned wrists. He closed his eyes and began to count the seconds. He knew the Bureau's emergency response protocols intimately because he had personally helped write them. Far away, inside the subterranean command center of the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C., the atmosphere had violently transformed from a quiet night shift into a localized hurricane of controlled panic. Assistant Director Quinn Ashford stood rigid before a massive wall of glowing digital maps. Ashford was a terrifying figure in the Bureau, a former Marine Force Recon commander who possessed zero tolerance for failure and an absolute vicious loyalty to his field agents. On the central high-definition monitor, a pulsing red icon was superimposed over the topographical map of Oak Haven County. "Talk to me," Ashford barked, his sharp voice cutting through the frantic typing of a dozen technical analysts. "Sir, we lost audio contact with Agent Langford's vehicle," a senior communications tech reported, his fingers flying rapidly across his mechanical keyboard. "The vehicle's telemetry indicates it was pulled over on State Highway 9. Shortly after, the secondary transponder, the one embedded inside the classified Pelican case, began moving independently of the vehicle. It has now come to a complete stop at this exact location." The digital map zoomed in rapidly, highlighting the brutalist footprint of the Oak Haven Police Department. Ashford's eyes narrowed into dangerous, icy slits. The implications were horrifyingly clear. A local, notoriously corrupt police department had just intercepted a senior federal agent carrying highly classified, unredacted federal informant files. If those sensitive files were opened and leaked, dozens of deep cover operatives across the eastern seaboard would be brutally murdered. Did Langford initiate a duress signal? Ashford demanded, pacing like a caged tiger. No, sir, but his biomonitors indicate an elevated heart rate consistent with physical restraint. We have to assume he is currently in hostile custody and his cover identity is unbroken. The local PD has not run his fingerprints through the National AFES database yet. They aren't processing him. They're trying to figure out what they stole. Ashford deduced instantly, his jaw clenching tight. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a rogue precinct attempting an illegal seizure. I want the hostage rescue team mobilized immediately. Contact the regional federal SWAT division in the neighboring county and federalize them. I want helicopters in the air. Nobody touches that box. Nobody hurts my agent. Execute Broken Arrow protocols. We are taking that station. Back in Oak Haven, Blake Hensley was sweating profusely. He stood in the precinct's disorganized, dusty evidence room, armed with a pair of industrial bolt cutters. He clamped the heavy iron jaws around one of the solid steel padlocks securing the Pelican case and threw his entire body weight into the long handles. The cutters bit harshly into the metal, but the lock refused to yield. It was forged from a hardened boron alloy, specifically designed by military contractors to withstand exactly this kind of brute force assault. Come on, you piece of garbage, Hensley grunted, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple from the extreme exertion. Soren stood nervously in the doorway, chewing his fingernails down to the quick. Blake, maybe we should just call a judge, Soren pleaded, his voice trembling with unchecked anxiety. Get a warrant. If we open that without a warrant and there are actually drugs inside, any half-decent defense attorney will get the whole case thrown out. You know that. And the guy, he hasn't asked for a lawyer. He hasn't said a single word since you locked him up. It's freaking me out. I don't need a warrant when I have probable cause, Hensley screamed, losing his temper completely. He threw the heavy bolt cutters to the concrete floor with a deafening clatter and grabbed a solid steel crowbar from a tool shelf. I'm popping the hinges. I know there's weight in here. I can feel it. I'm going to ruin this arrogant guy's entire life. Hensley wedged the sharp end of the crowbar underneath the reinforced plastic lip of the Pelican case. He was entirely consumed by his own arrogance, blinded by a desperate, pathetic need to validate his deeply rooted prejudiced assumptions. Because he was cursing and panting heavily, he didn't hear the distant rhythmic thudding vibrating through the damp night air. But Soren heard it. The rookie stepped quickly away from the evidence room door and walked out into the main bullpen. The cold coffee in Sergeant Crow's mug was trembling violently, sending tiny concentric ripples across the dark liquid. The low, thudding noise rapidly escalated into an overwhelming, deafening roar. It sounded as though a localized hurricane had suddenly descended upon the sleepy, isolated town. What the hell is that? Crow muttered, dropping his crossword puzzle and standing up slowly from the front desk. Soren walked slowly to the front glass doors and peered out into the dim parking lot. His breath hitched sharply in his throat and the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him utterly pale. Two massive matte black Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk helicopters were hovering just above the precinct parking lot, their immense rotor wash kicking up blinding clouds of dust, gravel, and loose trash. Simultaneously, three heavily armored Lenco Bearcat tactical vehicles smashed effortlessly through the chain-link fence surrounding the rear of the station, coming to aggressive, screeching halts at every possible exit point. Dozens of men clad in heavy olive-drab tactical gear, Kevlar helmets, and night vision goggles poured out of the vehicles. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, carrying short-barreled assault rifles locked tight to their shoulders. "Police! Open the doors!" A mechanically amplified voice boomed from outside, powerful enough to rattle the bulletproof glass in its frames. "This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are completely surrounded. Step away from the doors and place your hands on your heads immediately." Inside the evidence room, Hensley froze instantly. The heavy steel crowbar slipped from his sweaty palms and clanged against the floor. He stumbled out into the main bullpen just in time to see the front doors violently breached. A specialized tactical entry team shattered the reinforced glass with a heavy steel battering ram, swarming into the lobby like an unstoppable tidal wave of tactical superiority. "Hands! Let me see your hands! Do it now!" Federal operators screamed, sweeping the room with blinding tactical lights and red laser sights. Sergeant Crow instantly dropped to his knees, throwing his trembling hands high in the air. Soren was already flat on the ground, sobbing quietly in sheer, unadulterated terror. Hensley stood entirely paralyzed, his small mind utterly unable to comprehend the apocalyptic scene unfolding in his previously untouchable domain. Two massive operators aggressively tackled him to the linoleum floor, driving a heavy knee into his spine and violently wrenching his arms far behind his back. Through the shattered remnants of the front doors strode Assistant Director Quinn Ashford. He wore a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal suit that contrasted sharply with the militarized chaos completely surrounding him. His expression was cold, unforgiving, and utterly devoid of mercy. He walked deliberately past the trembling local officers and approached the secure holding cells. "Where is he?" Ashford demanded, his voice a low, incredibly dangerous rumble. An FBI tactical medic had already located the holding room and quickly sheared the deadbolt off with a specialized thermal breaching torch. The heavy steel door swung open and Darius Langford stepped out into the chaotic, crowded hallway. His expensive suit was wrinkled, but his posture remained absolutely perfect. He held out his arms, and the medic quickly utilized a universal key to unlock the brutally tight handcuffs. Darius rubbed his raw, bleeding wrists, his expression utterly impassive. "You all right, Darius?" Ashford asked, his hard, weathered features softening for only a fraction of a second. "I'm perfectly fine, Quinn," Darius replied smoothly, straightening his tie. "The local welcoming committee was just a bit overzealous tonight." Darius walked slowly into the main bullpen. He looked down directly at Officer Blake Hensley, who was currently pinned to the cold floor by two federal operators. The arrogant, untouchable local predator had been reduced to a pathetic, hyperventilating mess. Hensley stared up at Darius, his eyes wide with a horrified, sickeningly clear, dawning realization. The quiet, incredibly polite black man he had targeted, bullied, and illegally detained wasn't just a helpless civilian. I was a high-ranking, vastly powerful titan of federal law enforcement. "I warned you, Officer Hensley," Darius said, his voice completely calm, echoing clearly through the abruptly silenced room. "I told you that you were making the absolute biggest mistake of your professional career. That case you just attempted to destroy contains level 4 classified federal intelligence. By detaining me and attempting to forcefully breach it, you have effectively committed federal kidnapping, grand larceny, and severe espionage." I didn't know," Hensley stammered pathetically, hot tears of sheer panic welling in his wide eyes. "I thought the smell. I was just doing my job. Please." "You were abusing your badge to feed your own pathetic prejudice," Darius corrected him coldly, turning his back. "And now your badge belongs to me." The aftermath of that night was swift, entirely brutal, and thoroughly public. The FBI did not simply leave the town with their agent, they effectively seized the entire Oak Haven Police Department. Realizing the sickening depth of the localized corruption, the Department of Justice immediately launched a massive, sweeping civil rights investigation. High-profile civil rights attorney Ben Crump was later retained by several local minority families who had been previously victimized by Hensley, leading to a massive class-action lawsuit that entirely bankrupted the town's corrupt administrative budget. The entire department was placed under a strict federal consent decree, systematically dismantling the highly toxic culture that had protected abusive men like Hensley for decades. As for Blake Hensley, the relentless federal prosecutors showed absolutely no leniency. He was aggressively indicted on multiple felony federal charges, including the armed kidnapping of a federal agent, severe deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and the attempted destruction of classified government property. During his highly publicized federal trial, Hensley's defense attorneys desperately tried to argue that he had made an honest mistake, a simple procedural error in the dark. But the jury saw right through the transparent lies. The cruiser dashcam footage, successfully recovered by federal forensic teams, displayed Hensley's blatant, venomous racism for the entire world to witness. The judge, visibly disgusted by his terrible actions, handed down the maximum allowable sentence without the possibility of early parole. He was entirely stripped of his pension, his freedom, and his false sense of superiority. I was sentenced to a long term in a federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. A harsh, highly unforgiving environment where former abusive cops were universally despised. Nate Soren, the young, naive rookie who had failed to intervene but ultimately cooperated fully with federal investigators, was quietly but permanently dismissed from the police force. He never worked in law enforcement ever again, forever haunted by the terrible night. He watched a petty, arrogant tyrant mistakenly pick a fight with the entire overwhelming weight of the United States government. Karma had not just softly knocked on the front door of the corrupt Oak Haven Police Department. It had kicked it completely off its heavy hinges. If you were captivated by this intense story of justice and karma, please hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our gripping, real-life inspired dramas. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought of Officer Hensley's shocking downfall. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories to life. Stay safe and thanks for watching.